Welcome to the Golden Flower Podcast, a sanctuary for your creative soul. I'm Angela Levesque, a digital artist, meditation teacher, wordsmith, and transformational guide based in Boise, Idaho.
And I'm Gemma, and I'm an abstract painter. I teach meditation. I'm also a creative coach, and I'm based in Portugal.
Well, today we are talking about resistance. And as creators or just as human beings, resistance is something that we come up against over and over. It's really an inherent part of doing things outside of your comfort zone. And we're talking today specifically about the liminal space where the heat is really on, where we're close to seeing something come to fruition. And the creative ways, our shadow aspects, and the classic saboteur archetype blocks the flow and gets us off track. So we are titling today Resistance at the Precipice. And I am definitely no stranger to this, as we will get into in a moment. But because this is a creativity podcast, we like to start off with an excerpt or passage or poem that someone has written about the topic we're about to explore. And today, the passage we decided on is pretty much by the king of resistance. If you've ever read Steven Pressfield's The War of Art, I think he says the word resistance about 1,500 times in that book. It's really, I think, critical reading for anybody who's living a creative life. So this is actually from his personal blog at stevenpressfield.com. These are his words. I wrote a post a few weeks ago that resistance knows more than we do. What I meant by that was that our inner self-saboteur, by some mysterious alchemy or algorithm, can tell when we are onto something good. It can even tell how good it is. Resistance responds accordingly. The better the piece we're working on, and by better, I mean more important to the evolution of our soul and to the progression as an artist, the more resistance we will feel to advancing it and to completing it. Resistance is a force of nature. In other words, good idea equals big resistance. Great idea equals humongous resistance. Let me add further corollary. Our progression as artists and entrepreneurs never happens in a smooth upward line. Instead, we get better in stair-step fashion. That is plateau, 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 then breakthrough. Thus, pre-breakthrough moment equals super humongous resistance. Resistance is mighty and diabolical, but it has a weakness. Its weakness is that its force of nature. It is a force of nature and thus operates by fixed and immutable laws. Resistance is predictable. The more resistance we feel to a project or idea, the more certain we can be that that idea is critical to the evolution of our soul, and the more certain we can be that that idea is good. So, brothers and sisters, when we feel ourselves becoming irritable and impatient for no reason, when we can't sleep, when we've lost our appetite or our appetite has mysteriously doubled, when we can't stand to face the typewriter or the dance studio or the editing studio, when the lamest distractions pulls us irresistibly off course, when we hate ourselves and everything around us, take heart. It's resistance. And its message is, the idea you're working on, honey, it's a winner. Suck it up and go for it. Resistance is infallible. Ooh, I love Steven Pressfield. And honestly, I have his book, The War of Art, on Audible. And every time that I feel myself, that idea of taking, 3 steps forward and 5 steps back, I listen to The War of Art. It's sort of like my warrior anthem, and it gets me pumped and it gets me into that place of like, okay, I can do this. I got to keep going. And yet sometimes I don't. So you've read War of Art, haven't you?
I have a while back. It's one of those, like you say, I have it on the bookshelf and I periodically pick it up, go to it. It has been a little bit of a while now, but you can read any extract to me from that book and it would immediately wake it up. It's kind of it. He's got such a rhythmic way of expressing that it goes in and it stays in. Yeah, it's really powerful.
Yes. Well, when we get back from this short break, we are going to dive into the topic resistance at the precipice. All right. As I mentioned today, we are talking about resistance on the precipice, and this is my classic move. As I said, this is a really specific liminal space. It's right when things are about to like manifest, right before you're going to take that manuscript or that story or whatever it is and put your baby out into the world. And whether that's just getting a friend to read it or an editor or whatever it is, I can't even tell you how many times or how many projects I still have sitting, on my desktop incomplete. And, it might be on the fourth. For example, I have a couple of things that I've written that are on like the fourth draft that I just can't seem to finish. And the incredible thing is my resistance is so insidious because what I will do instead of, pushing through and finishing that project is I will like learn Japanese or pick up my guitar and start to, teach myself a new song. And in my brain, it's like, oh, it's okay. You're not working on that, but you're learning Japanese or, you're teaching yourself guitar or whatever it is. And so it's like I can somewhat justify in my mind that I'm not working on that because I'm doing something else productive. And that to me is so insidious because that's classic saboteur behavior. It's like distraction, distraction, distraction. And I'm honestly, I am a student when it comes to working through resistance. Like there's just no way getting around that.
Right. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying there about that you consider this like the saboteur. I'm not sure. Part of me wants to offer that that is part of the process, but resistance, I think we have a sense that it's to do with going beyond what our thermostat setting is, right? Internally, everyone is unique in terms of how our nervous system is set, in terms of what it feels comfortable and safe. And finishing your manuscript, putting something out, it's often in this realm of like finish, complete, and share. That the mechanism kicks in and suddenly we find ourselves unable to do what is necessary to complete and share. And I can also say I'm no stranger to this, and no one is. This is part of it. I think that sometimes we think that this fog or haze or distraction that we go into is to do with the creative project that we've got or the circumstances that we're in. I take the viewpoint that it's representative of a peak, like a clash of our internal dynamics and I like that Steven Pressfield talks about the gold of resistance because I think it gives us a lot of necessary information. I'll explain why, because if we think about, I think the creative process can be defined by how we learn to move with our spectrum, our polarized spectrum of our internal dynamics. So, a few episodes back, we were talking about what's pulling us forward in terms of inspiration. And then we've been looking at like what pulls you back. So if you think about our intrinsic needs, things like the nonviolent communication, NVC, inventory of needs, I think what happens is that the pull of the idea, the project, the manuscript, the exhibition, the podcast, we can talk about this. It satisfies those really important needs for so much, our need for expression, our need for freedom, our need for creativity itself, our need for growth, all of these things. And then what happens is that we also have needs for safety, security, for privacy, for health and well-being. And due to, everyone is individual in this respect, but we're kind of all the same at the same time, that we've had some kind of wounding, which means that our need for often safety in some respect gets triggered by the action step that we're about to take, hence the precipice. Like it's what does that precipice mean? An edge, a cliff, suggests danger, like take one more step and wah, wah, and that is what goes off. The alarm bells go off, and there's a clash of needs. The problem is, and the reason that we are all feeling so kind of exhausted and crushed by the power of resistance, is because it aligns with the more primal needs. Safety and security is a heavyweight compared to autonomy, freedom, growth, creativity, which they are equal. That's why they're needs. There's no hierarchy. They are all needs and equal, but the way we're wired gives the survival mechanism the advantage. You can't really argue that easily with survival mechanisms as you can for developmental, like it's not these. It's like, we will pay the consequence if we don't meet our need for growth, for expression, for expansion, all these kind of things. We know that it's just that it's not as immediate. And I'm sure you know about this, I call it the snapback. It's like something just kicks in, and it can kick in and take. So like, it's quite funny that you suddenly find yourself learning Japanese. Like, wait, wasn't I doing something else? What was my goal this month, this year? Japanese. No. And it can literally kind of take over your mind. Like, like you type in, you join something, sign up for something, spend money on something. Like, we could just, right now poll out to everyone listening, everyone we know, and we would get such an array of snapbacks or types of resistance, or the hilarious places that people have found themselves. It's a force to be reckoned with.
Well, I'm curious as you're saying that, because I agree with everything you say about that clash of our needs for security and safety, and also our need for self-expression, and, as you go up Maslow's hierarchy of needs to self-actualization. But I feel you also mentioned the word wounding, and I feel that a lot, and I'll speak personally, of my resistance, yes, it's the need for safety and security, but that's really, what's the word I want to use? Like, it's really just a cloak for a lot of my shadow. Like, for me, my saboteur comes out and distracts me by, picking up the guitar or whatever it is, not because necessarily it's in clash with my need for security, but because there's this part of me, there's that wounding that's deep within inside me that worries about not enoughness. And I think that, yes, I understand, like, on some level that's intimately related. Like, you don't want to be too vulnerable, you don't want to be too exposed, you don't want to open yourself up to criticism, but that's not necessarily, I think that that's the idea of just needing security and safety. I feel that that's like a cloak just for what's underneath that, which is, not enoughness. Like last week, what was that? Episode 3, I think. Yeah, this is episode 4. We did a hashtag shadow constellation exercise. So episode 2, we talked about like what's inspiring us, what's pushing us forward. And then episode 3, we did a framework that looks at what's pulling us back, so that, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And I realized as I'm doing this, and I'm not going to share my constellation the way that I shared my inspiration, because it's deeply personal, and in order for me to go really into that, I had to explore some very personal relationships, which is not for public purview, right? But what I realized as I'm putting together this shadow constellation is, yes, it was not enoughness. That's always like when I look at, those things that I get offended by, or, have any more of those, have more dense emotions towards something, usually not enoughness is at that seed. But what I realized when I was looking at, how everything was threaded together, is underneath that was shame. And I think that we can't dismiss, when we're talking about especially resistance at the precipice, some of those seeds of shame, of abandonment, of rejection, of the shame, that those things that are really underneath it. And that's ultimately, and again, I'll speak for myself, what's been pulling me back.
Yeah, you're speaking for yourself, and you're speaking for us all, because you're right. You can say things like safety and security, but you don't have to look far to get to the not enoughness and the shame. And it makes, it feels like there's not enough lifetimes, to get to the bottom of all this and heal everything, so that we can just finally just enjoy what it is that we're choosing to do. Like, why does it have to be so intensely difficult to do the very things that we know that we're capable of, that we know is within us? But yet, because of this wounding that probably happened in very early childhood, beyond our conscious memories, like, how are we going to reach that, alchemize it? So I guess we're at that point where it's like we can all recognize that we might have different flavors of this same thing that is the root of resistance. So what to do about it?
Well, you and I had an interesting conversation yesterday, off of recording, and we talked about like the shadow dimension. And last episode, we talked about the way that the soul speaks to us, and it's through symbolism and story and that sort of thing. And I will talk about one of the people that I put on my shadow constellation, and it's Donald Trump. I don't feel bad talking about him. And I want to say for our listeners, it's not because he's Republican, or, he's not on my team or that sort of thing. I'm actually not a Democrat either. And I don't want to make this too political, but I've always disliked him. And I find him to be a bully. I think he's brash. I think he's a great symbolic figure for the collective shadow. So as I'm writing down all the things that annoy me, one of the things that I literally wrote is that he has no shame. Like, oh, that's a little bit, that's got a little bit of a charge to it. And I a lot of times when we talk about shadow, and when we talk about, things being reflected back to us, it's never like, oh, he's a bully, so I'm recognizing the bully inside of me. It's always deeper than that. It's not a surface conversation. And so sometimes, again, that root digging, going underneath. Okay, that's annoying, but why does that annoy me? Okay, but why does that annoy me? And keep, going down. And so when I got to that line, he has no shame, I was like, that's really interesting. And it's not that I want to be more like Donald Trump, but it brought me back to that level of, oh, there's a piece of me that is really bothered by that, because I'm working through my own shame. And so I'd love for you, because you're so good at this, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the shadow dimension, and why it's not just like, oh, he's a bully, so he's reflecting the bully back to me, and why it's always so much deeper than that.
Why is it so much deeper than that? Hmm.
Like, did you have a similar, because you also did this exercise?
Yeah, I think with the shadow, it's just like you got to go for the examples. So again, without, I mean, when we did the inspiration constellation, I had a bit of a mind blank, which was my resistance was telling me, "Oh, you don't know who's really inspiring you at the moment," and I bought into that. But it came to my awareness that actually, no, what's really lighting me up and speaking to me is a group of women who are really fearlessly speaking out, often about controversial topics, but just really owning it and sharing their life experience in a really powerful way. And lo and behold, when we came to do the shadow version of the same constellation, I didn't really have to look very far because, the way in is to go into judgment. And I actually had a very useful experience, which was recently, one of the women has an awesome podcast, and I'd followed someone and I kind of was getting more into her vortex and the book and everything. And then I landed on her Instagram, and then I just found myself kind of like, tune out, like a little bit of a barrier go up. And I gave it zero thought at the time. I was just like, well, I thought and then no, and I changed my mind. Like, that happens all the time. But because of the exercise, and this is the thing about doing exercises, like actually having the experience of choosing to go in, it's amazing what we can remember, or what's offered to us as helpful communication. And I honestly paid no real attention to this. It was a non-event, but then in the light of doing this exercise, it's like, oh, you remember how that happened? It's like, yes. Internal dialogue. It's like, was it because you felt like she was a bit too kind of confident almost? It's like, maybe. And then it's like, because as much as there is the inspiration about the power of using the voice, there's also my projection of fear that there's something unsafe about that there's something dangerous about that, that it's risky, and there's a judgment about making that choice and whether it's worth it. So all this kind of stuff is not new. The shadow's never new terrain, but kind of like the way that we can relearn. Because I would say, watch out for this. One of the traps of doing shadow work is that it can bring a feeling of fatigue, like, not that again. Oh yeah, I need to be more confident. I wish I was more confident. I wish didn't have all this fear around using my voice. And you just go into that place where you think you know the whole story, and it's going nowhere. Like, that's a wonderful trap. Resistance loves it if you fall into that trap, because I think one of the things that it's like, well, when we go in with curiosity and get into those subtleties and that nuance, which is we were touching on in the previous episodes, it's like we're looking for, it's a subtle level of communication which is bringing us the gold. I lost my train of thought.
Can I ask you why? Because I feel there's something underneath that when you say, like, putting yourself out there is risky. Why is it risky?
Because people won't like it and they will judge you, and then you'll have to deal with that energy. But it's nonsensical. Like, that is exactly the kind of question that I need to ask myself, or whenever we do that work, because it's like, what comes up, it's like, it doesn't really make sense. It's like, this is the thing. And then it's like, well, I think I have a 2-year-old, right? She's confident all the time. And I can really see how easy it would be to shut down a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old when they like really want to be exuberant. And it could be, without getting too much detail, I'm pretty sure something along those lines happened that really, really shut me down in such a way that it's left such a mark that it feels like extremely unsafe to say things that may provoke a less than supportive response, So this is something that I've always found difficult about the artistic path, because it's like, it's committing to expressing what is true for you. I don't think it's a coincidence that I went deeply into abstraction, because abstraction is like almost like coded communication. You can express a lot, but you're not really kind of confined by there's nothing, it's not direct. There's one of the things that I really admire is a woman able just to communicate clearly and directly from her own experience in a way which is just completely owning it. There's also part of me that finds that absolutely terrifying. Like, I project on their behalf, like, do you know what you're doing? Like, yeah, what if this or this? And I just get in a spin about it. So I was able to see that, part of the reason I'm doing that exercise now, it's like, okay, what are the reference points, coordinates of what's attracting me and pulling me forward? What's going to be on the risk resistance team that's likely to give me obstacles and kind of pull me back? And then it's like, okay, very familiar. Been through like many cycles of this. What is it about the awareness that is going to offer me, like, you touched on that iceberg metaphor, bringing to awareness the qualities of the resistance does a lot of the work for us, because what is it doing?
Well, I want to speak on a couple of things that you touched on about things being unsafe. And I think that there's a few things that kind of put that in kind of hyper mode in our society. As one, we have social media now, right? So like it's one thing for you to create something and it be for yourself, and it allows you to move through things and express yourself, and that's great. But when we start thinking about putting it out there, part of that, not feeling safe is that we live in a digital world where people don't know you and they feel perfectly fine sharing why you suck. You know what I mean? Like, not having in real life conversations, even if somebody didn't like your work, they probably would be less willing to share their opinions. So there is a real piece of that, you have to have sort of a thick skin to be able to put yourself out there. But another thing about our current climate is because we talk so much in trauma language. And I think that this is another thing you need to be mindful of when doing shadow work, is like I think it's important to understand what's holding you back and, the roots of those resistance. But it's also just one perspective from which to see the world. Like, we can see the world through our wounding, and we can see it through, the psychological and the language of trauma. And I think that that's important. But I think, at least for me, transcending some of that is really looking from higher perspectives and realizing that that's like one way that you can engage with some of the things, some of our shadow aspects. And one thing if I did the constellation exercise this week, I would have Alex Hormozi on my constellation. And I love it because he's an investor, and he's put a book out. So he's on a lot of podcasts, and he's made a ton of money and made a lot of mistakes and had a lot of failures in business. And he talks about, usually those people that are, that inner dialogue that's, oh, don't do this. Who are you to put that out? This isn't good enough. All of that. Usually that voice comes from a couple of people, right? If it's in your head, it might be your parents. It might be that coworker. For some reason, you put a lot of stock in that person's opinion, and you can, that's the voice that you hear. And he's like, when you think about this, if you go way down the line and you're an old woman, are you still going to be hearing that voice? Is that voice still going to matter to you? Someday that person's going to die, and then you'll realize, and he's very blunt about this. He's like, and then you'll realize that you held yourself back because of, those couple of voices in your head that represent something, right? They're like, they're, a manifestation of something deeper. But I think being able to realize that, yes, it's important to look at things through our wounding and understanding it, but that's not the only way that we can approach our creative work and approach resistance. And so sometimes just elevating, just blowing wide open your perspective, at least that really helps me move through things.
100%. I think that, like you say, that expanded perspective is putting things in perspective. I think it's kind of like these living maps that we talk about. It's just like it's just like you just need a sense of what's there and a sense of where it might come from. My approach for this is sometimes been to, like, I would say two things stand out to me, which is, one is that curious, like having a relationship with the parts of me that are wanting to keep me safe. Like, there's lots of different ways. There's like parts work, you can get, you dialogue with these parts, but it's like in any relationship, for a healthy relationship, you don't, because I feel like sometimes the question is coming my way a lot, which is, what do I do about resistance? Am I supposed to fight it, like just push through? Like Stephen Pressfield's quite like that, right? Just do it anyway. Like, or yeah, or am I supposed to have compassion for it? This is like, there's exercises you can do, like feed your demons. I could put links to that in the show note, where you're just kind of, it's too complicated to go into now, but it's like, am I embracing it? Like, what's the approach? And then it's like, well, if you think about in a relationship, how complex any relationship is, you don't have like a protocol, like an automatic response for something as complex as a relationship. You've kind of just got to learn as you go and draw from things in the moment. But there are a few things which we know contribute to healthy relationships, and even difficult ones, which is acknowledgement and respect. And a kind of, for me, that's just kind of acknowledging that these things are present, that they're part of me, that they always will be. And the other thing is that they have intentions that are in a way just as valid in terms of the service that they offer as the positive, the inspirational. And I think there's a limit to what we can do with our mind holding these kinds of things. This is why I like to kind of let the actual creative process itself, let things move through the experience of being creative. Like, I've got a quite good example of this. I think I mentioned a few episodes back about this communication I had around, I felt a lot of shame around how intense I can be, like feeling so, like just so much going on all the time. Like, I'm imploding. Can you see I'm imploding? I've got so much, I'm processing so much, I'm feeling so much, it's overwhelming. And this need to have permission for that to be okay. And one of the ways that I gave that to myself was through painting. I found that, here's the parameters and borders of the painting, and I'm giving myself permission to be as intense. So there's one painting that comes to mind, which was around this time, and it's just layers and layers and layers and layers. The title is called Through This Chaos. And it's like, as I'm painting all these layers and not holding back on just how much is going on there and all the kind of details and all the reaching for all different kinds of materials. I'm having a shit ton of crazy dialogues going on, stuff I can't recall it now, but like lots and lots and lots of layers of things simultaneously. It's like, and this is something that Jung probably doesn't talk about it exactly like this, but this amplification, this permission / amplification, where you say, okay, here's this thing like intensity, or I don't know if you can use, I'll just stick with this example. And I'm just going to say more, be more of this, like go over the top. Where I could stop, I'm going to keep going. Where I could do less, I'm going to deliberately do more. I'm going to really, really experience the intensity of the intensity. And it does kind of move things. It was like having loads of, as I do on my laptop, have loads of things open. And then it all goes into this I don't know what this is. But space is created. Stuff is played out. It's beyond my conscious attention, you know. It's on a kind of feeling level, but it moves through. It's like a container is created in the actions that are happening in the space between me and the canvas. Evening, stuff starts to move, and it was the best part of a year. I just kept coming back. And then at some point, I remember sitting in the studio, just looking at the paintings. I do a lot of just hanging out and observing, and there's a lot there. And I just was like, okay, I just grabbed some pigment and I just threw it into the center of the painting. And I was like, that's it. I'm pausing this. I don't really know what happened there. And part of me was just like, until you start painting again. But it's never been, I never went back to it. Through this chaos, you can see it's got this kind of hole of this lilac pigment in the middle. That did something, and Jung dedicated the second half of his life to this because he really knew he was onto something, and he was really encouraging this as like a really key part of the individuation process, was to amplify, go all in on these where we find this clash of dynamics, instead of trying to kind of think our way through things, to let let the flow state kind of come in and do things beyond, what's the end of the sentence, beyond what we can consciously kind of enact or command ourselves to do. And I've really found that to be incredibly powerful. And in a way, it's really turning towards the thing that you're kind of running away from and getting right in there and having it kind of transform in some way. Well, I don't know if you've experienced anything similar. Like,
I was going to say, I love that so much because I'm more of a like warrior, soldier through it, walk through the fire. And sometimes that works great for me. And sometimes I learn Japanese. You know what I mean? So what you just said to me is amazing, because that makes so much sense. And you're not resisting the resistance. You're sort of leaning into it, which I think is amazing. And at the same time, and this is what I was talking about too, on some level, like we're so caught up in, especially like I said, psychological language is now just used all the time in, regular conversation. And it's so, at the same time, you're talking about feelings, but at the same time, it's so intellectual, like it's so cerebral that we're, let's just talk more about it. Let's talk more about it. And you're like, no, let's move through it. Let's explore this. And I love that, because that to me takes us out of our head, takes us out of our wounding, and allows us actually, like, there's so many ways that we can move through stuff, whether it's through dance, whether it's through drumming, whether it's through painting, you know what I mean? That isn't about us just rehashing and regurgitating and lamenting. And, that what you just said to me is incredibly powerful. And I'm going to try that next time, instead of just like, okay, where's my warrior? Let's harness my warrior energy and walk through the fire. I think that's fantastic. Well, yeah. we are going to take another short break, and then we're going to dive into next week's creative challenge. So if you're like us and enjoy different frameworks and exercises and the doing the work, stick around and join us after this. Welcome back. Like I said, we enjoy doing different frameworks and exercises. And frankly, speaking of shadow work, I've done so many different frameworks to explore shadow work. And today we're going to talk about doing, is it needs or need inventory?
Well, it's kind of just it's borrowing from the nonviolent communication. Is it Michael Rosenberg?
I don't know. We'll make sure we have that in the show notes. So why don't you explain to us, and this will be hashtag need inventory for this week's challenge. And we always post these on Instagram in some fashion. So if you're listening to this episode at, a year or 2 years from now, and you want to try doing need inventory and share your thoughts or ideas with us, all you have to do is find us on Instagram at Golden Flower Podcast and include the hashtag need inventory. And we would love to see how this worked for you and any of your thoughts and insights that came out from working through this challenge. So, Gemma, explain to us exactly what a need inventory is.
Well, I'm sharing this because this is something that I did to help me this week, because I have a block around I can speak all day and fire up everyone about making art, but when it comes to sharing things and using social media, then it's been a bit of a battle for me. And I knew I had I'd committed to sharing a bunch of stuff. So I was like, okay, I'd recently participated in a workshop which had just reacquainted me with the nonviolent communication needs list. It's a list of the universal needs that we have. I'm going to include it in the show notes. There's like 30 more of them. Like, we touched on safety and security, but also things like exercise, choice, freedom, inspiration, spontaneity, community, acceptance, harmony, peace, growth. It's great to have this around. So just things that I wanted to touch on. One was just when we just got to the end of our previous section, and you were saying that you were keen to kind of try something that was similar to what I was talking about with the amplification. One of the things is we get stuck because we get stuck in mental loops. And one of the things about handing our stuckness over to the creative process is that we introduce the other dimensions of the emotional realm, the physical body, the spiritual realm. All these dimensions become available. So I think this would be a great thing to pick up next week when we chat and just talk about, like, how can we devise, like, create exercises and experiences almost around our resistance. Anyway, so we'll come back to that. And then this, literally what I did was, okay, I went through every single one being like, how does this project, so whatever it is that you're trying to do, say I want to sit down to paint, but I'm just not, or I want to finish my manuscript, or I'm going to have to, I don't know, post this blog and I'm scared, or whatever it is. I can share this exact list, and it's just a case of sitting down and just going through, how does this commitment, this activity, or this thing that I want to do, how does it meet my need for, and then just go through them and just get a whole picture then of the things that are a bit like this is, like, for me, a fast track of doing the constellation exercise, the one that is showing us what is pulling you forward and what is pulling you back. It will just give you a very quick snapshot about what comes up for you, you basically just go, okay, so in terms of, I don't know, let's look at this, like physical well-being, like when it comes to holding the phone all the time, I don't do well. It actually makes me like quite unwell. I actually had physical symptoms, not great from, I was just very, very sensitive to phones and stuff. So I was like, okay, that's part of my resistance. I don't want to have that. I don't want to have trouble sleeping. I can get massively overactivated by looking at the screen. Other things like consistency. This is going to require me to be consistent. This is something I struggle with. What is going to help? So I then just, I had a piece of paper, so I was like, okay, I'm creating a system. So instead of it being like, my challenge was to be setting up our Instagram, instead of it being anything, it's just like, no, I'm posting in this format, and this is going to help me with my consistency. So I was like kind of able to see where are the weak spots. So instead of it just being like this unconscious draggy feeling that, oh, I've got to do this thing and da, 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 it was like, okay, I've brought it to my conscious awareness. I've gone through all of this. I have a good picture, and I suddenly got really like, this is meeting a lot of my needs in a really positive way. Look at this, like, this creativity and self expression and this self-esteem, like and it's a growth and it's challenge and I'm learning and it's discovery, and all these things came to light, which I really didn't expect were going to be involved. So I think the whole theme here is, when it comes to resistance, take the time to bring things to the light, to your awareness, to your conscious awareness, and just let that kind of, it does the work for you. It's when things remain in the shadow realm that they
that they
they
fester.
are, yeah.
And I love that too, because also you figured out a specific like pain point there about me too. If I spend the whole day on my computer, my energy is jacked up. It's like I've drank 5 cups of coffee or something. Like I can feel it reverberating through my body. And so also when you bring those to light, you can find ways to mitigate some of those things. And you might not be able to mitigate everything, but at least if you know that's the thing, you're like, okay, well, I can spend about 45 minutes doing this before it really starts to bother me. Or it'll work better if I do it 10 minutes 3 times a day. You know what I mean? But sometimes you don't know. And so it's very hard to create solutions when you haven't really named, what your actual pain points are. And so that's fantastic just in that regard as well. Because there's no solutions if you haven't named the problem.
This is it. I think this is so much of why resistance causes problems, because it's almost like that little child being like, do you know about this? Have you got a solution? Have you got a strategy? Can you meet me? Like, we talked about like the foundation of a healthy relationship is that acknowledgement and that respect. And another layer is to, it's like bringing that, that is exactly what happened. It was like, it was like little hands going up, like, this is going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem. And being like, yeah, you're right. Let's look at that little strategy, little plan, and then all that part of me just calmed down. We don't often approach things like this. We often have, you talked about like just pushing through. It's so hard to do that, and often when we do that, we fragment ourselves off into like, we bring in the masks, we bring in the persona, we bring that part of us. It's just like, okay, I just got to go through. But it's not the same as letting ourselves be ourselves, that vulnerable self. But it's just this other level of meeting our needs. And it's like, we can know this, we can know it's a good idea. But I was really, really grateful to have this come back. And, it's like a book I read a long time ago and went, that's brilliant. That applies to every area of life. Let me never forget this. Let me never, never forget this. And then, oh, I forgot it. So having it come back, and I hope that's, I'm offering it up again now, hoping it will do the same thing. It's like, it's just that extra level that goes a long way.
Well, if you are listening and you have a specific thing that you're trying to work through, you're meeting resistance, please join us and do the hashtag need challenge. And we will explore further on our next episode this idea of amplification. I think that's fantastic. Next episode, we're going to be talking about creativity as self-development and diving into that. Yes, so connect with us at Golden Flower Podcast on Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel where we put up these videos at the Golden Flower. And yeah, so thank you so much for tuning in. Follow the aliveness, nurture that spark, and have a great week.